60 seconds before the lights went down in the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel in New York City, Elena Vance adjusted the cuffs of her tailored black suit and looked at the seating chart on the digital monitor backstage. Table 4, Row 1, Seat A. Marcus Vance, Principal Partner, Vance Capital Management, net worth $1.4 billion. He was there because his firm had invested $12 million into the corporate catering tech platform that was sponsoring the evening's main event. He did not know who was receiving the final award of the night. The program listed her only as the founder of the Baseline project. He had not seen her name in 18 months. He had spent $400,000 on legal fees to ensure he would never have to see it again. The clock on the wall read 7:59 p.m. 18 months earlier, on a rainy Tuesday morning in Seattle, Elena stood on the pavement outside the glass towers of the King County Family Court. She had one cardboard box under her right arm. Inside the box was a pair of running shoes, 3 notebooks filled with behavioral data metrics from her time at the University of Washington's Computational Linguistics Lab, and a silver keychain, with no keys on it. Marcus's security detail had taken the house keys from her fingers in the corridor outside the courtroom 3 minutes after the judge signed the emergency temporary order. The order was absolute. Marcus Vance retained sole possession of the $8.5 million residence in Madison Park. Marcus Vance retained temporary sole custody of their 7-year-old son, Leo. Elena was granted 2 supervised visits per week, lasting 2 hours each, at a state-monitored facility in downtown Seattle. She was ordered to vacate the marital home by 5 p.m. that evening. She did not need until 5 p.m. She left with what she could carry in her hands. Marcus had not used a standard divorce attorney. He hired Arthur Vance and Associates, a corporate restructuring firm that specialized in high-net-worth separations asset insulation. They didn't treat the marriage like a relationship, they treated it like a hostile corporate takeover. For 3 years before the filing, Marcus had systematically altered the architecture of their life. When Elena left her doctoral program at 26 to develop the baseline predictive language algorithms that would later form the core of Marcus's primary trading fund, she signed an intellectual property waiver. He told her it was a standard protocol for marital asset protection. It wasn't, it was an assignment of rights. Every line of code she wrote between 2021 and 2024 belonged exclusively to Vance Capital Management. When they bought the house, it was registered under an LLC based in Delaware. Elena's name appeared nowhere on the incorporation documents. When Marcus opened the investment accounts for Leo's trust, he used a private family foundation, where he was the sole director with absolute distribution power. On the day the papers were served, Elena had $412 in a personal checking account she used for minor household expenses, her credit cards. All sub-accounts of Marcus's primary black card were deactivated at 11:14 a.m. Precisely 14 minutes after the process server handed her the envelope in the kitchen. She spent the first night at a $45 a night motel near SeaTac Airport. The room smelled of industrial bleach and old carpets. She sat on the edge of the mattress with her laptop open on her knees. The battery icon showed 14%. She had forgotten the charger in the hurry to clear her desk. She didn't look at real estate listings. She didn't look at job boards. She opened a terminal window and began typing commands into a raw text editor. She was looking at the core architecture of the data parsing scripts she had spent 5 years perfecting. Marcus had the legal right to the compiled software. He had the right to the commercial application. But he did not have the right to the mathematics inside her head. At 3:00 a.m., the laptop screen went black. Elena didn't close it. She leaned her head against the wall and listened to the sound of airplanes taking off every 4 minutes. She had $367 left after the room fee. She had no job history outside of her research fellowship, which had ended when she married Marcus. On paper, she was an unemployed dependent with zero asset generation capacity. In the eyes of the family court, she was a financial liability to her own child. 2 weeks later, Elena moved into a 6-by-9-foot storage unit in an industrial park south of Pioneer Square. It wasn't legal to sleep there, but the facility manager was an old university acquaintance who looked the other way, on the condition that she was out of the building by 6 a.m. every morning. She bought a portable battery pack, a high-gain wireless antenna, and 3 boxes of protein bars. Every day at 6:15 a.m., she sat at a corner table in the public library on 4th Avenue. She stayed until the doors closed at 8 p.m. She wasn't looking for employment. She was building an entirely new framework for asynchronous data extraction. The software Marcus was using at Vance Capital relied on static linguistic modeling. It analyzed market sentiment by scanning corporate filings and news feeds for specific keywords. Elena knew its flaw. She had built it, after all. The flaw was that language isn't static, it changes under pressure. The true predictive signal wasn't in the words people chose. It was in the syntax density and the micro pauses between sentences during live earnings calls. She spent 22 days writing the prototype engine. She called it Baseline. It didn't require a supercomputer or a massive server array. It ran on an open-source Python compiler using public cloud credits she obtained through an anonymous developer forum. By week 6, she had her first dataset. She mapped the live audio feeds of 42 mid-cap manufacturing companies during their quarterly reviews. The engine flagged a 14% shift in syntax fragmentation in the speech pattern of a CEO who was publicly projecting record earnings. 3 days later, the company announced a product recall that dropped its stock by 31%. Baseline had predicted the drop 72 hours before the market moved. Elena didn't sell the data. She didn't have a broker account to trade on it. She took the printout of the predictive log, walked down to the shipping terminal at the Port of Seattle, and waited outside the office of an independent logistics firm called Vanguard Freight. The owner, a 51-year-old logistics operator named Sarah Jenkins, was running a fleet of 24 regional delivery trucks and struggling with fuel cost volatility. Elena didn't ask for an appointment. She stood by the fuel pumps until Sarah came out to speak with a driver. Your shipping routes are costing you $4,200 more per week than your competitors, Elena said, stepping into Sarah's path. She held out a 3-page data summary. Your regional dispatchers are using route optimization software based on historical traffic patterns. It's wrong. The logic doesn't account for the current construction delays on Route 5 South. This analysis shows the actual throughput efficiency based on real-time driver radio feeds. Sarah didn't take the paper. Who are you with? Nobody, Elena said. I have the data. You use it for 7 days. If your fuel expenditure doesn't drop by 10%, you don't owe me anything. If it does, you pay me $500 and give me access to your raw freight data logs for the last 5 years. Sarah looked at the paper, then at Elena's shoes, the same running shoes from the court box, now worn down at the heels. $500 isn't enough to fix a route model, girl. It's enough for what I need, Elena said. 7 days later, Sarah Jenkins called the burner number Elena had left on the back of the sheet. The fuel savings hadn't been 10%, they had been 14.2%. Sarah didn't just pay the $500. She opened her data cabinet and handed Elena a hard drive containing every log, fuel manifest, and driver itinerary from Vanguard Freight since 2019. With that data, Baseline stopped being a theory. Elena moved out of the storage unit and rented a single desk in a shared workspace on the industrial fringe of the city. She lived on black coffee and stale bread, sleeping 4 hours a night on a foam mat behind the desk. She poured every line of Vanguard's history into the engine. She mapped the relationship between driver fatigue, route delays, and fuel efficiency until the software could predict a delivery failure 6 hours before the truck even left the warehouse. While Elena worked, Marcus's legal team continued their scheduled updates to the court. Every month, a 3-page report arrived at Elena's digital inbox from Arthur Vance and Associates. The wording was always the same. The respondent continues to demonstrate a lack of stable, residential infrastructure and verifiable commercial revenue. The current supervised visitation schedule remains appropriate to maintain the stability of the minor child. Elena didn't contest the reports. She didn't respond to the emails. She went to the facility on 3rd Avenue every Tuesday and Thursday at 4:00 p.m. She sat at a plastic table under fluorescent lights, while a social worker with a clipboard sat 4 feet away, recording every interaction. She didn't talk to Leo about Marcus. She didn't talk about the house or the money. She brought a notebook and drew circuit diagrams with him. She taught him how to look at the patterns of the rain hitting the window and find the sequence in the drops. "Is Dad coming to get us?" Leo asked during a visit in the 3rd month. "Your dad is where he needs to be," Elena said, keeping her voice entirely level. "And we are where we need to be. Look at the grid, Leo. Tell me where the line breaks." By month 6, the baseline engine had optimized the operations of 4 more local freight companies. Elena wasn't charging them standard software licensing fees. She took 2% of their realized operational savings. By month 8, her monthly revenue crossed $14,000. She didn't buy a car. She didn't move into a luxury apartment. She stayed in the shared office, but she hired 2 senior back-end developers from her old university lab, who had been laid off during the tech contraction. She didn't offer them high salaries. She offered them equal equity shares in an engine that was currently processing 3 terabytes of logistical data every hour. The shift happened in November. A mid-market supply chain aggregator based in Chicago, Apex Logistics, was targeted for a short sale campaign by Marcus's fund, Vance Capital. Marcus had identified a structural weakness in Apex's regional distribution network and had taken a $45 million short position, expecting the company's stock to crater after their Q3 earnings report. Elena saw the short position on a public, regulatory filing feed she monitored every morning. She spent 48 hours straight analyzing Apex's data. Marcus's analysts were correct about the current distribution bottleneck. But their model missed a variable. Apex had just integrated a new predictive scheduling system for their long-haul drivers. A system that Elena's engine recognized because it was a direct copy of the routing logic she had built for Vanguard Freight. The bottleneck wasn't a failure? It was a temporary consolidation phase before a 30% increase in operational capacity. Elena didn't call the press. She didn't message Apex's board. She packaged the baseline predictive report, proving that Apex's efficiency was about to double within 30 days, and uploaded it to an open-source financial analytics platform used by institutional venture funds. She signed it with the corporate name she had registered with her first $500. The baseline project. The report went live on a Thursday morning at 6:00 a.m. By noon, it had been downloaded 0 times by risk managers across Wall Street. By 2:00 p.m., 3 major pension funds withdrew their short support positions. When the market closed on Friday, Apex's stock hadn't dropped. It had risen by 18%. Vance Capital's short position was caught in a squeeze. In 48 hours, Marcus's primary fund lost $11.4 million. In his office on the top floor of the tower in Madison Park, Marcus Vance slammed his hand onto the mahogany desk. "Who wrote this report?" he demanded of his head analyst. "Where did this data come from?" The analyst held out a tablet. "The entity is registered as a cloud-native analytics firm in Washington state. The registration is completely private. But the underlying code architecture, the way it processes linguistic syntax from the earnings calls, it looks identical to the prototype model we seized during the Vance divorce proceedings in 2024. Marcus stood up, his face hardening. "That's impossible. She doesn't have the infrastructure. She doesn't have the funding. Check the bank records from the settlement." "We checked," the analyst said, his voice dropping. "She didn't use banks. She's been funded entirely by operational savings from the regional freight sector. She doesn't owe anyone a dime." And Marcus, her firm just filed an institutional intervention notice with the SEC regarding our data acquisition methods. The legal machinery that Marcus had spent 3 years building to crush Elena began to grind to a halt. You cannot starve out an opponent who doesn't use your economic infrastructure. You cannot compromise a credit rating that doesn't exist. 4 weeks later, Elena Vance's legal team filed for an emergency modification of the custody agreement. This time, she didn't use a state-appointed legal aid lawyer. She was represented by civil rights litigator Diane Vance. No relation to Marcus, but a woman known for taking apart corporate structures in family court. The filing was 200 pages long. It didn't contain emotional pleas. It contained audited financial statements showing the baseline project's monthly recurring revenue at $312,000. It contained a deed for a 4-bedroom home in the tech corridor of Bellevue, fully paid for in cash. It contained the testimony of 3 independent child development experts who had reviewed the logs of the supervised visits and found that Elena's interactions with Leo were structurally superior to the environment provided by Marcus's shifting rotation of nannies. The hearing lasted exactly 22 minutes. Judge Maynard looked at the financial logs, then at Marcus's legal team, who were sitting in silence at the defense table. The core argument for the initial temporary order was the financial and residential instability of the mother, Judge Maynard said, her spectacles clicking against her desk. That argument no longer has any basis in reality. In fact, looking at the current liability exposure of Vance Capital, the court finds the father's long-term financial stability to be the variable under question. The judge signed the order. Joint legal custody, with primary physical custody shifting to Elena at the end of the school term. Marcus was ordered to pay $14,000 a month in child support. Money Elena immediately directed into a public educational trust for low-income children in South Seattle. Which brings the story back to the Grand Ballroom of the Pierre Hotel in New York City, May 2026. The announcer's voice echoed through the high-ceilinged room. And the final inclusion in this year's Forbes 30 Under 30 in enterprise technology. A founder who turned raw mathematics into an operational shield for industry, the creator of Baseline, Elena Vance. The spotlight swung away from the stage and tracked across the front row, momentarily catching Marcus Vance in its beam. His face was entirely pale. His hands were flat against the linen tablecloth, motionless. He looked at the stage as Elena stepped out from behind the curtain. She didn't look down at him. She didn't make eye contact with table 4. She walked straight to the podium, her movements precise, her posture perfectly aligned. She adjusted the microphone with her left hand. The hand that no longer wore his ring, the hand that had held a single cardboard box outside a courthouse 18 months before. She didn't deliver a speech about resilience. She didn't thank her mentors. She looked directly into the lens of the primary television camera, broadcasting the event live to 3 million viewers worldwide. When you build a system designed to eliminate someone's existence, Elena said, her voice dropping into the quiet, rhythmic cadence she had used to train her algorithms, you must ensure you understand the foundation of what you are trying to destroy. Because if you leave even one line of code intact, if you leave the mathematics behind, the system will eventually rewrite itself, and the new version will not include you. She stood there for 3 seconds as the room remained completely silent. In the front row, Marcus Vance lowered his head, his fingers tightening around his water glass until the knuckles turned white. He knew what the next morning would bring. The market would open at 9:30 a.m. and Elena's engine was already running.